This week we're going to take a look at a parable, a little two-verse parable about compatibility and incompatibility. It's in Mark chapter 2, verses 21 and 22. It's a parable that also occurs in Matthew chapter 9 and Luke chapter 5, but we're going to focus on Mark chapter 2 today. And before we get to the parable, we need to look at the immediate context. And in other words, what are the events that precipitated the telling of this parable? And how do those events govern our understanding of what Jesus told these people and why he told it to them? It's important to understand the reason for a statement to maximize the possibility of wringing out the full meaning of it, right? So let us carry on and take a look at Mark chapter 2, verse 18. This is from the ESV. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" So the him in question is Jesus, and people come and they have this great question. We're looking at people that we know to be religious. We're looking at people that we generally take to be sort of role models. The disciples of John the Baptist and the disciples of the Pharisees, and we see that both groups are fasting. But we also see that your disciples are not fasting. So what is it that they're expressing? They have a confusion. There's a deviation from their expectation. We know some religious folks, and we think of you and your followers as religious folks, but those religious folks are doing A, and your religious folks are not doing A. How do we reconcile the difference? Is somebody wrong and somebody right? Who should we be following in their example? Those guys or your guys? We don't know. It's a challenge to their understanding and their expectations. Here's Jesus' immediate response to them in verses 19 and 20. And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day." So he essentially says to them, the situations are not the same. Okay? He says his followers are not in the same situation as the followers of John the Baptist or of the Pharisees. But there is still a time coming when fasting will be appropriate. So part of what Jesus is saying to his questioners there is that they don't understand the dynamic. The reason that they can't reconcile the differences is they think that the disciples of Jesus are in the same situation as the disciples of John the Baptist or of the Pharisees. And Jesus says their situations are not the same because they currently still have the bridegroom with them. When the bridegroom is no longer with them, when he's taken away, then they'll fast. So your misapprehension, your discomfort, questioners, is because you don't understand that my disciples are in a different situation than those folks. Which brings us to the parable. It's short, it's 2 verses. We're going to look at it in 4 individual parts, and let us begin with part A from verse 21. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. And this is a pretty wild phrase in Koine. There's a lot for us to look at. We'll do it fairly quickly, but let's dig in. Oudes epiblema hrachus agnaphu epirapte epihimation palaion. So at the beginning, oudes, no one. No one. Now you'll notice my translation immediately below the Koine is very rough if you just read it as it is. I went vertical so that we could pick it apart and look at the words and what they're contributing one at a time. So oudes, no one. Epiblema comes from epibalo, and it's that which is cast upon. a patch in this context, because we're going to hear something being sewed onto a garment. So the context tells us that epiblema from epibalo is a thing which is cast upon something else. And then we get hrakus, cloth, agnafu, an unmilled, an untreated, or an unshrunk cloth. No one casts a cloth patch that is unmilled or untreated, unshrunk. Then we get epirapte, sewn upon, that's our verb, epihimation palaion, upon an old garment. You don't take an unshrunk patch and sew it upon an old garment. Not you, actually. No one sews an unshrunk patch upon an old garment. Pretty great stuff. Oudes epirapte, no one sews, is what's called a gnomic present. Notice that Jesus doesn't say, my seamstress Miriam doesn't do this. He doesn't look into the crowd to whom he's speaking and say, you don't do this. He says, no one does this. In other words, no one who knows anything about sewing takes an unshrunk patch and sews it on an old garment. And we're going to find out why in the next piece. But the gnomic present talks about something that no one who knows what they're doing, no one who's familiar with this issue does. It's gnomic, it's the rule, it's what people in the know, in this case, don't do. Okay? What don't they do? They don't take a patch that's unshrunk or untreated, new cloth, and sew it onto an old garment. And let's get into why. Before we get into why, in the context of the parable, what's old and what's new? The people who've approached Jesus with the issue have expectations and an understanding, and it's established, it's old, it's an old garment. And Jesus and what his disciples are doing is new, and they're having a hard time reconciling that. And that's a good thing, because no one sews a new patch, an unshrunk patch, onto an old garment. Let's look at why they don't do that in 21b. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. Let's break this down into three pieces. The first piece, the patch tears away from it. Ire to pleroma op autu. So ire, it tears, that's our verb. Op autu, from it. And then we get to pleroma. To pleroma is literally the fullness. So in the context of a patch sewn onto a hole on an old garment, the fullness is the thing that fills in the hole, right? So the patch is here described as the fullness. In this case, the untreated or the unshrunk patch tears from it. Next, he gives us the second part, tokainon to palaiu, the new from the old. Tokainu, the new, to palaiu, from the old. So he wants to make sure that they understand it's not the old garment tearing away from the new patch, it's the new patch tearing away from the old garment, because it wasn't pre-shrunk. My wife is a quilter, and I originally marveled that she would go out and buy brand new fabric from the quilt store, and the first thing that she did with it was wash it and dry it, because you can't take the risk of sewing unshrunk cloth to shrunk cloth, because later when the unshrunk cloth shrinks, the tension is going to break the stitches. It's going to tear it away from the already shrunk cloth. That's the dynamic with the garment. The fullness, the patch on the old garment, because it hasn't been pre-shrunk, when it does shrink, will tear from the old already shrunk cloth. And then we get the last part, kaikeron schisma ginetai. Ginetai is our verb. It becomes What becomes schisma, the schism, the tear, charon, greater, more than, worse, and chi is also. So what happens when you do this thing, when you put the unshrunk patch on the old garment, the new tears away from the old, and it actually makes the tear worse. So you've not only not fixed the problem, you've made the problem worse if you sew an unshrunk patch on an old garment. That's why he says no one does that. Oudes epirapte. No one sews that new unshrunk patch onto the old garment, because everybody knows it's going to do more harm than good. It's going to make the tear worse. So if you try to mix the new with the old, the new tears away. And then he says, to be crystal clear, to make sure nobody misses it, it's the new that tears away from the old. It's not the old that tears away from the new. That's important. And then he says it not only doesn't fix the old thing, it actually makes it worse. So new plus new, or old plus old, no tear. But adding the new to the old without treating it first is a formula for greater harm. In the context, who's the new? What is the new thing? Jesus and his teachings and his ways that his disciples are following are the new thing. He's not advocating, in fact, he's cautioning them against trying to mix the new, Jesus plus what they already expect and know and do. If you try to mix that with the old, you're probably going to do more damage than good. It's not going to make the old better. It's actually going to result in harm. They're experiencing the tension already. They've come to him and questioned him because of the tension. We don't understand why you and yours aren't doing like them and theirs. This is creating a tension for us. The new tears away from the old. Next, we get the second part of the parable in verse 22a. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. So there's the second part of the parable. Notice there's another gnomic present. No one puts new wine into old wineskins. He doesn't say Bob the vineyard dresser. He doesn't say my mom didn't do it this way. He says no one who knows about wine puts new wine in old wineskins. So another new-old conflict, but this time instead of tension from contraction, we get tension from expansion. When wine ferments, it produces gas. And so he says, when you put new wine into new wineskins, the new wineskins can handle the expansion, the pressure. They can stretch out and take that pressure. But once they've done it once, they can't do it a second time. When you put new wine into old wineskins and the pressure exerts, the wineskins have already reached their full stretch capacity and they will burst. And what happens when they burst? He says it destroys the wine, right, because it's spilled out on the ground, and it destroys the skins because the skins couldn't handle the pressure. Both the wine and the skins are destroyed if you try to put new wine in old wineskins. Pretty fantastic stuff. And then finally, we'll get to the fourth part, and then we'll circle back around and look a little bit more at the third part. Verse 22b says, but new wine is for fresh wineskins. Let's look at that quickly in Koine. Alla oinon neon, rather new wine, eis askus, kainus, is for fresh skins. So this is an interesting thing, this last little bit. that sounds like an explanation. It's not a part of the parable, it's an explanation. And this little explanation doesn't appear in any manuscripts until the 4th century AD. So this is what is commonly referred to as a gloss. This is someone's comment on the parable. Okay, so if it doesn't appear until the 4th century, we have manuscripts of Mark's gospel from the 2nd century. So from the late hundreds and into the from the 100s into the 200s, but this little phrase doesn't show up until the 4th century, somewhere in the 300s. And so it's almost certainly a gloss, but I love this gloss. It's a great gloss. This comment by an early reader, an early copyist, or an early church father comes along and he says, new wine is for new skins, for fresh skins. You don't put the new wine in the old skins because it results in a catastrophe. The old skins can't handle the pressure of the new wine. Pretty magnificent stuff. The old skins are already stretched out to capacity. They won't be able to endure, to yield, to take the shape of the pressure that the new wine brings. So it's kind of like Nicodemus in John chapter 3, right? Jesus says to him, you must be born again. And Nicodemus says, can a man re-enter his mother's womb and start over? He says, this is a weird thing to me. This doesn't work with my expectations. That's a lot like the context here, isn't it? We have expectations based on what we see religious people doing and on our upbringing and on our understanding. But you and yours are doing different things, and we're having a hard time. It's creating tension. It's creating pressure for us. We don't know what to do with this. Help us understand what we're supposed to do with this. And he comes along and he says, new patches will tear old garments, unless, of course, the new patch has been treated and prepared. There has to be preparation. Something has to change for these things to be compatible. And he says, new wine is not compatible with old wineskins, pre-stretched, already at their limits, vessels that can't handle the pressure that new wine will bring. So if you have new wine, you have to put it in a new vessel. It has to go into new wineskins so that it's capable of handling the pressure. You must be born again. You have to be a new person to live this new life. Jesus tells Nicodemus that this thing that he's looking for, that he's coming in the night to learn from Jesus, has to go with a new person, a recreated being, a reborn human. And he says to his hearers here, the reason that you're struggling with understanding the fasting thing is you don't understand that this situation and that situation is different. My disciples understand that it's different, and I'm teaching them that it's different, but your struggle to understand this is because you don't know that this is different. And here's how different it is. It's so different that if you try to take this and put it on that, one's going to tear away from the other. If you try to take this and put it in the same vessel that's stretched you to your limits already with what you already know, it's going to burst and it's going to waste both the wine and the skin. New wine for new skins, fresh skins. That's the way it has to be, because the new wine of Jesus and his message and his teaching and everything that he's bringing isn't just something that gets added to the old thing. In fact, you can't handle the tension or the pressure if you try to just add this to that. The new thing and the old things are not compatible with one another. If you really want the new thing, you're going to have to become a new thing. Because new wine is for fresh skins. You must be born again. The context brings us the meaning and the understanding, right? There's a great parallel in the Old Testament where the Israelites who've been led out of Egypt are told, you can't mix with the peoples around you. You have to be a peculiar people unto your God. If you mix with them, it's going to destroy you, and it's not going to be good for them. And so there are some interesting things in the Old Testament teachings in Exodus and Deuteronomy and Leviticus that say things like, don't wear garments of mixed fibers. So you're either going to wear wool or you're going to wear cotton. Don't blend wool and cotton. Why? What's so terrible about blending wool and cotton? It's symbolism. It's a metaphor for your interactions with the people around you, right? You're either going to be wool or you're going to be cotton. But if you try to mix wool and cotton, bad stuff's going to happen, okay? So here, the parable is a lot like that, right? If you want to patch the garment that you're wearing with this new thing, with this Jesus thing, but the two things aren't really compatible. They're not going to go together well. And then he takes it to another step so that they can understand. Because they're saying, well, what if I treat the Jesus thing? What if I shrink the Jesus thing? Then it won't tear the garment. No. You take this as you get it. You can't change it. Once you've changed it, it's no longer the Jesus thing. And then he steps it up to the next part of the parable, the wine and the skins. There's going to be pressure. Know that when you take this on, when you go into this new thing, there's hard teachings here. Like my flesh is bread and my blood is wine. This is hard teaching, and there's going to be pressure. You can't put it in the old wineskin because it's going to burst and you're going to lose the wineskin and the wine. So the compatibility issue has to be resolved. And the only way for that to happen is for the hearers, the people coming with their questions, to recognize that they have to become fresh wineskins. You must be born again. Pretty great stuff, really, kind of magnificent. Hope that was good for you. If it was, you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification dinger, tell a friend, leave some feedback in the comments because the algorithm loves feedback. It will drive the video to other people if it sees that you're interested. And until we see one another again, Kars Kairene Humin, grace and peace to you.